Go. Boom.
So we are now in the Lagering cellars of the Jackson Brewery. These Lagering cellars were built about 1864, 65, and we are a couple levels underground. So we're about 30-some to 40-some feet below ground level. Let's take a look around. So these are very typical lagering cellars. Most of the lagering cellars that we have in the city of Cincinnati, they mostly look like this. When you get into the later 1800s, there's a little bit of change in the building pattern, but as a general rule, they're this arched stone construction. Really, really strong, very sturdy. These tunnels actually are built so well, we still have some of them under parking lots today because they were so tough and it would have been so expensive to fill them in that when they bulldozed brewery structures on top of the ground, they just paved over top of it, and they've been parking hundreds of cars over top of 2 levels of lagering cellars like this in several locations in this city for a long time, since about 1920 in most cases. So typical kind of stone construction. When these were in use, they would have been really clean, and they would have always kept these walls whitewashed because they're making beer down here, and you don't want to get anything into your beer that's going to pollute your beer. You definitely don't want to get bacteria into your beer because it's going to sour your beer. So this is what a lagering cellar looks like. The ones here at Jackson are really massive. You can still see in these cellars some remnants of cooling lines that go around the top of the cellars. And this cellar is so big that it is 2 different chambers side by side, and there's 2 different levels of this tunnel. So we're going to take a little walk upstairs, and you can pan around and take a look at kind of the sense of this while I grab a light. Let's go see what we can see. I always kind of like this room in these cellars because you can see what's left here is where they used to roll full-size barrels back and forth for storage. And so because these cellars are 2 layers deep, that would have been typical. And the layer that we're about to walk up into, they would have fermented beer up there. And down here, they just would have stored it. And they would have stored beer in the 1800s for 6 to 9 months. That's how long you stored really good premium lager beer. And from these rails, you can kind of see, the mammoth size of an original full-size wooden barrel of beer. Now, a keg of beer is called a half barrel because it is half of a barrel of beer. So when you think about a keg that is twice the size of a keg and it's made of wood, which is going to make it heavier and bigger, you get kind of a sense from this of how damn big a barrel of wooden beer would have been. Let's go upstairs. here looks basically the same. They would have used this space upstairs a little bit differently again, in the sense that up here you would have had huge wooden barrels, 2 deep, and they would have taken up most of this room. So the space looks really huge now, but when it would have been in operation, there would have been a pretty narrow channel to walk between these big, huge wooden fermenting vats. And unlike today we use sterile stainless steel fermentation vats, and we make sure that you don't get any pollutants in them. Back then, they were still trying to understand yeast, so they thought that leaving those vats open was necessary to let enough oxygen in to help carbonate and ferment beer. So big open vats is what they use. On the wall here, these things that look like hooks. This is not where they hung you when you were bad. If you think about like the back of an air conditioner, a room air conditioner, the way those coils wrap around, that's basically what this would have looked like when this brewery was in operation. There would have been pipes that serpentined around, and that would have been part of the cooling systems. Those pipes would have pushed ammonia through to cool. Now, ammonia is a very good coolant. It's actually a very green coolant. We don't use it today, and very early refrigeration was very common to use ammonia. We don't use it today because when it escapes, it is very deadly. So manufacturers don't want to kill you if there happens to be a leak in your refrigerator or your air conditioning system. That's how they cool breweries, and it was one of the many, many ways that working in a brewery was dangerous. Now on the floor here, we see a drain channel, and we also got a sense of a little more of the construction of these spaces. Really heavy, everything is large stones and stone drain channels for cleaning this out. And when you think about constructing this space, all of this was done by hand. This is the 1860s. So we're talking about a lot of people digging really huge holes to build these spaces, carrying down huge flagstones and stones, massive amounts of work, and a whole lot of construction. Let's walk through a little bit more. You can see there's where you would have gone upstairs to the brewery. Boiler room would have been through here. Very cool, big, heavy, funky door to get into that boiler room. In here, you see a lot more remnants of cooling pipes. You can see they go along both sides of the wall all the way around. So that's what this space would have looked like when it was in operation. Actually, this chamber looks the most, in terms of the walls and the cooling lines. Cooling lines really go on all around both sides, sometimes along the ceiling as well. And everything would have been whitewashed, painted white, and kept immaculately clean. drain channel and floor. I'm going to point out one final thing, and that's in all of these lagering cellars, you'll see a lot of these spaces that kind of look like fireplaces. This one is deeper than most of them, but they're not fireplaces. What they are is ventilation shafts. These were incredibly important, particularly in the upper part of the brewery where you were fermenting beer, but even down here where you're storing large amounts of beer. The beer at that period of time, when it's in the barrels, it would continue to ferment. Now, what happens when you're fermenting beer? It's giving off CO2. It's eating up oxygen, and it's giving off CO2. Now, that means that these ventilation shafts were really critically important, because if you did not have them, then the air in these tunnels would become poisonous from all that CO2 that the beer is giving off. So you'd die down here if you didn't have these ventilation shafts. Very critically important part of the construction. Now here in Jack's Brewery right now, we see a lot of debris and a lot of things that look burnt. And this is pretty recent. This has to do with the fire that occurred here in December 2019. And I used passive voice, which is not really appropriate because it was arson. So a couple of idiot arsonists set this brewery building on fire, and we're still in the process right now in the summer of 2020 of trying to get through that and get through the damage and figure out how to save the building and rebuild from the damage that was caused, which was massive. So this is Jack's Brewery Lagering Cellars. We'll take a separate little trip upstairs. All right, I'm going to go drink a beer.